Okay, so what were the problems that weather was creating for these people who wanted to send messages across wires? Samuel Morse found existing communications frustrating. During one of several trips to Europe aboard the Sully in 1832, he discussed electricity and long distance communication with a Dr. Charles Thomas Jackson, a medical doctor who also worked with electricity and magnetism and who dabbled with the telegraph himself. This is something you're going to see all down through to present, is that a lot of times somebody will have a career, let's say in medicine, but he has a hobby. He has a little hobby shop at home that he tinkers with other things. There were people who developed some amazing stuff in photography who tinkered with chemistry. It's just, it's amazing. It's amazing. Think about what your hobbies are. Do you tinker with anything? Do you think you might one day come up with an invention that's going to help people? So he's traveling on this ship, and he finds another intelligent person, and they're just throwing these ideas around. So Morse was working on a device that could print out the code on a piece of paper, allowing unattended reception of the code. His original code used numbers to equal words. So he's already thinking not just how to do it, but how to do it cheaply, efficiently. So he thought, well, right now we have to have somebody sitting here waiting for the code to come out of the machine, and then he has to translate the code. But he's thinking about finding a way to circumvent that. He quickly determined that this method was not going to work well. The conversion of numbers to words was too limiting. So he applied for a patent on his Morse code telegraph. I'm sure you've heard of Morse code in 1837. It was dots and dashes. His patent was granted, and soon a line connected Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. Operators who could transcribe 25 to 30 words a minute used code to send messages, including news about the national nominating conventions of the Whig and Democratic parties. There was no Republican Party back then. Not until Abraham Lincoln was there a Republican Party. Original line made between Baltimore and Washington, D.C. Insulation failures prevented underground installation. B&O Railroad Counsel John Latrobe convinced Morse to string the wires on poles along the rail track. When the telegraph line went up between New York and Boston in 1847, it spelled the end of the Pigeon Express. Just like the desktop computer spelled the end of the typewriter. You don't have typewriter companies anymore. Now, he had to convince people. These inventors had to demonstrate their inventions and how their inventions were so fantastic, giving them a way to basically advertise these new inventions so people would want to buy them. And if there was a greater demand and he could make more, he could bring the price down. That's what happens with all new technology. When it comes out, it is expensive. It is usually large. It is usually too complicated until a lot of people start using it. And then you'll see when the radio came out, it was like a piece of furniture that filled up an entire room. You were dwarfed. If you sat next to a radio, the radio was huge. We'll see some pictures of it. And then as more people bought into this, radios got very small until a professor, John Bardeen, invented the transistor radio. We'll talk about him later. And then we could start having radios that were like this, okay? Got smaller, got cheaper. May 24th, 1844, messages were sent back and forth between Baltimore and the Supreme Court chamber, including the infamous phrase, What hath God wrought? What hath God wrought? That's hard to say without lisping. Messages from the capital to Baltimore in the ensuing days and weeks gave the Baltimore Patriot the scoop over rivals, and the value of the telegraph as a communication medium was firmly established. Newspapers touted the transmission via telegraph across their mastheads. How did this actually change journalism? Well, this enabled transmission of messages across continents, across the Atlantic Ocean, and eventually across the Pacific Ocean. Again, you could get your news from other places very, very quickly. And so if you're the first one out with the news that maybe the war is over, you're going to sell all the newspapers. So it was very important to get the news out fast. Commercial considerations. Samuel Morse made his first patent application in 1837. He attempted to sell his invention to the government for, are you ready? $100,000. He started the Magnetic Telegraph Company in 1845, and Western Union bought up the various telegraph companies in 1857. Royalties made Morse quite wealthy by the end of the Civil War. The government would not pay $100,000, and of course the telegraph led to so many other things, led to radio and television and just wonderful inventions, and it was all based on this. This is the sign that says the first telegram, "What hath God wrought?" And it references the book of Numbers in the Holy Scriptures, which is "What hath God wrought?" It just was really a fantastic invention. Now we have an interesting story of the first flight ever of a heavier-than-air machine, which was, of course, the Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. This is a photograph of one of them taking off. Actually has left the ground December 17th, 1903. You have just flown. Okay, this is something that I'm going to ask you to think about. I'm not going to ask you to do this, but I've done it when we have regular in-class sessions. You have just flown the first flight ever of a heavier-than-thou machine. There is great competition to be the first to do such a thing, so you decide to send a telegram to beat anyone else with the news. Telegrams are expensive, and they are charged by the word, so you want to use as few words as possible to communicate the facts. So I have asked my students on a piece of paper with your name, date, and email at the top, write the telegram you would send. You have 2 minutes to write it. Use only the facts on the next slide. Who you are sending it to, the date and time, where you are sending it from, and your name are not included in your word total. The Wright brothers used 32 words, and back then that probably cost them $32. I'm just guessing, which was a ton of money. A hyphenated word back then was counted as 2 words. 3 words and the hyphenation was counted as 3 words. So you're thinking to yourself, how can I say all of this in the smallest number of words? All right, these are the facts. You have flown your airplane 4 times this Thursday morning, and each time the flight was considered a success. You had a 21 per mile headwind you had to fly into. You started on level ground using only engine power. All the time you were in the air, you averaged a speed of 31 miles per hour. The longest flight was 57 seconds. Inform the press. We will be home for Christmas. So all of this information, they were able to get into 32 words, which I'm going to show you right now. This was what the Wright brothers sent. And it's just under 7 Hawthorne Street. That is, what's left down there is the is the actual message. Success, 4 flights Thursday morning, all against 21-mile wind, started from level with engine power alone, average speed through air 31 miles, longest 57 seconds, informed press, home Christmas. And I have had some of my students come up with pretty good, like 21, 22 word telegram messages. Um, I think I think the Western Union Telegram Company went out of business. I think the last telegram was sent in 2006, something like that. I remember in college when I was dating the man who became my husband. If he couldn't meet me, he lived in another town. He would send me a telegram, and it so exciting to get a telegram, unless you had a brother or a son in the military, and a telegram usually meant that the person had died in service. So telegrams could be wonderful or they could be pretty bad. Here, we hear a lot about a telegram sent from the Titanic as it was going down. And this is what the telegram said. Now, I don't know what these words mean, but I think they indicate emergency, certainly the SOS. CQD, CQD, SOS, SOS, Titanic, we have struck iceberg. Sinking fast. Come to our assistance. Position, latitude, longitude. This was sent either April 14th or April 15th, 1912. Owner of boat swore under oath that he had not received any communication from the Titanic. Another one read SOS, SOS, CQD, CQD, Titanic. We are sinking fast. Passengers are being put into boats, Titanic. Now, they could have used fewer words. Instead of we are sinking fast, how about sinking fast? Passengers being put in boats, Titanic. Now we're going to get into the Pony Express.